Shalom, shalom, shalom. Baruchim habayim. Welcome to Awakening TORAH Mussar Mindfulness. I am Rabbi Chasya the founder and director of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness. And I'm delighted to be here with you today. We are about a week and a half behind due to illness, the flu coming into the winter season, and just coping with the trauma and grief and loss of the October 7th genocide and the kidnappings and the war and so many deaths of our beloved children who are serving as soldiers. So it's been a very hard journey, one day at a time of coping. So I'm grateful for your patience and understanding. Today we're jumping into the last parasha, the last Torah portion of inside the book of Genesis and BEREISHEET, and it's known as VAYECHI, okay? And this took place on December 30th, 2023, and it was the Yud Chet, the 18th of Tevet, the Hebrew month of Tevet, Tafshin Pei Daled, 5784 of the Hebrew year. So we're going to jump in and cover this Torah portion, and then we will strengthen one another to continue to jump into the book of Shemot, the next book coming in the series, which we won't do this evening, but we will do it, God willing, tomorrow or the next day. And so let me start with our kavanot, what we always begin with before we begin our learning together and then practice. So for those of you watching on video who are joining us live stream on our YouTube channel, please subscribe, or are joining us on any number of the social media channels, and you have vision and can see, you will see here the kavanot, the intentions for today's session. For those of you who can't see or are joining us on podcasts, on audio later, you will hear me read these out loud. So we see this time together, this about an hour of doing awakening together, as an act of radical self-care, of self-compassion, that we're doing it to strengthen our own souls during this very trying time, especially in order to be of benefit to others in the future, because the path of Mussar mindfulness is one in which we are of service to God by serving others. So we also see this time as doing this on behalf of others, that we're doing this to strengthen our relationship to others. We could be a better conduit of God's good to others when they need us. And the final one, of course, is that we're doing this to strengthen our relationship with the divine, with the Almighty. And so we want to do this so we can really be that source, that conduit of God's good to others when they need us. So these are our kavanot, our intentions for today's session, as it is in all the previous sessions. And may it be so. May we merit fulfilling this today, both in honor and memory of our ancestors, but also for everyone who is practicing on the path together today. May we be able to really help sustain each other and through this difficult time and on the path of healing over time. So Vayechi, in the book of BEREISHEET and Genesis, this is our 12th sitting. It's the 12th Torah portion. And I'm going to give you a brief summary of Vayechi. So you have to remember that all of Yosef's family came down to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, because there was a famine that went on for 7 years. And it had already been going on for 2 years when Yosef finally was reunited with them and told them to come down because there was 5 more years of the famine. So after 17, they spent 17 years in Mitzrayim in Egypt. Yaakov's life comes to an end. Now, Yaakov is the father of Yosef. He's the third and the last of our patriarchs in the Jewish tradition. So Yaakov, on his deathbed, blesses Yosef's 2 sons, Menashe and Ephraim, And Yosef places Menashe at Yaakov's right because he is the eldest, and then places Ephraim on Yaakov's left side. But Yaakov crosses his hands to place his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left hand on Menashe's head, saying that Ephraim will be greater than Menashe. We'll discuss this as it goes on because Joseph was really disturbed by this. So we'll touch a little bit based on that. So Yaakov gives his final brachot, the blessings to each of all of his children, essentially. But this kind of act of laying hands on Ephraim and Menashe is really him adopting them, which is common in the ancient Near East. Yosef instructs his children to bury him in the Ma'arah, in the field of Machpelah, back in the land of Canaan. And this is where Leah and Yaakov's parents, Yitzhak and Rivka, and where his grandparents, Avraham and Sarah, are buried. They're already buried there. So Yaakov dies, his family and all of Egypt mourn for him, and they bury him as he asks. This is all taking place in this Torah portion. And then finally, Yosef's brothers, after the patriarch passes away, they are afraid. They come to great fear that Yosef will take revenge against them for their hatred, for selling him into slavery, for their cruelty. Yosef calms them down and says it was all part of God's plan for him to come to Mitzrayim so that he could save all of them, including the Egyptians, from the famine. And finally, Yosef lives to see his great-grandchildren, and he makes his family swear to take his bones with them when they eventually leave Mitzrayim, and then he dies. So we end up saying goodbye to both Yaakov and Yosef in this parsha, Vayechi. So that's a quick summary of what's going on here. Hopefully you had a chance to read it, and hopefully this is a good reminder. It's jarring you of what went on in this Torah portion. So I want to start with, it's always important to look at the Parshanim, the different rabbinic commentators, and what they have to say during the Torah portion. And the one that struck me the most is actually someone dear to me in the path of Mussar. His name is Rabbi Ibn Pakuda, known as Bachya. And he wrote a very famous Mussar text called Duties of the Heart in English. And in it is a gate called the service of God. And why I bring him up, because I would say one of the complaints of, I don't even know if I want to call it a complaint, maybe constructive criticism of Mussar in the modern Western practice of it, even amongst secular practitioners, is that there tends to be a lot of judgment in the classic texts towards behavior that the author might not agree with. So here comes Rabbi Bachya Ibn Pakuda looking at Yosef's behavior. So what happens? So, excuse me. When they took Yaakov's body to bury him in the land of Canaan, and they're heading back down on the path home, Yosef stops at the bore, at the pit, where his brothers ripped off his katonet pasim, this beautiful jacket, kind of dress that his father had given him. They derobe him, and also just metaphorically, there's this great kind of rape might be too strong of a word, but a real sense of causing shame and humiliation, right? Removing his clothing, throwing him into this pit to die, and then deciding, and while he's crying in the pit, they sit down to have a meal. And they eventually sell him into slavery. Again, this is something that's not 100% clear. There are commentators who think that Other traders, Midianite traders, come and pull him out, and then they sell him to the Ishmaelite ones. But from my perspective and other commentators, they're brothers, particularly at the helm of Yehuda, sell him into slavery. Okay, so he stops at this boar and he's looking down at the boar, and the brothers see this and immediately have a ton of pachad, of fear. Okay, so Rabbi Ibn Bahuda comes in this gate of service, a gate of God, service of God, and he has so much judgment towards him that, and this is part of the whole midrashim, right? That he shouldn't have stopped at the pit. He had to consider how this is going to, the effect that this would have on the brothers, and almost like he should have known better. So I am deeply disturbed by this, because Yosef was clearly the victim. He's a 17-year-old boy. And even if you want to claim that he took his dreams too far, he was annoying, he was whatever, he did not deserve to be treated with hatred from his older brothers who were supposed to be more mature, wiser, and even serving in some role of a patriarch like Reuven and Yehuda, right? So he was a victim of hatred and violence, kidnapping and assault, and sold off to slavery, right? And so I just want to start by pointing out how dysfunctional in some ways this family is, and even our commentators' discomfort around behavior after the father died and what Yosef should have done or shouldn't have done. I just want us to really, so much of the Mussar mindfulness practice is being able to show up for what really is, seeing clearly. So I want us to just pause for a moment and see how unhealthy our ancestral and patriarchal families were in some ways, right? That they, that neither the brothers nor Yosef seem to have even shared with their father Yaakov the truth. It seems. I'll challenge that a little bit, but it's like there's the elephant in the room, right? That's a batui, an idiom in English, that Yosef being sold into slavery. Like, how did Yosef get down in Egypt? Why doesn't the father ever question that? Why doesn't Yaakov ever bring that up? Why don't they tell him how he ended up there, right? It's almost as if Yaakov is avoiding it also. So one of our greatest commentators, who I love and I always mention, is Nechama Leibowitz. May her memory be for a blessing. And she always talks about truth, even untruth, and its consequences, right? And I want to say that this is an omission, which is a form of lying. It's an untruth. Omission and its consequences. That this not sharing what was done really creates almost like little earthquakes in the foundation of the family and the relationship, right? And the consequences. So it appears, according to the text, that Yaakov, even on his deathbed, didn't even know that his son, his beloved favorite son, Yosef, was sold into slavery. Commentators assume if he had known, so this is another thing of what's omitted. If he had known, then surely he would have brought it up when he was doing the brachot, the blessings to all the sons. I mean, he admonished Reuven, who essentially, if you want to call it incest, there might have been rape. There definitely was trying to overthrow his father's power by sleeping with the wife or concubine of the father. So he chastised him for that act. He chastises Shimon and Levi for their total lack of anger management and revenge and vengeance that they did to all the young men and the men of and the boys of Shechem by murdering them for what Hamor, the prince of Shechem, did to their sister, kidnapping her, brutalizing her and raping her. So they assume that if Yaakov had known that Yosef was sold into slavery by his brothers, that it would have been a very different deathbed, is what is assumed. That a very different speech. He would have had something negative to say to all of them. And maybe it would have been clarified of how Reuven actually stood up and said, don't murder the boy, don't get blood on your own hands. And maybe that would have caused some type of tikkun between Reuven and his father Yaakov. We don't know, but there was just so much left unsaid. And we know in families, even today, even in our own tribes and families, right? This sense of like, when you don't speak about trauma and grief and loss, it really hurts the family and the relationship. It makes it so you're not whole. There's no shleimut. There's no wholeness. There's something deeply fractured, and you're always, you might be in relationship, but there's always something a little bit missing. Okay. So it's, as I said, it appears as if Yaakov doesn't know this. And there's something really tragic that he doesn't know, right? In order to lay the wrath on all of them, except for perhaps Reuven. And so it's a family that never faces the full consequences and honesty of its behavior. And it's not uncommon, actually, to talk about shared common humanity and to have some self-compassion here for us. This is probably very common among families. So oddly, the one who comes close to doing any type of tikkun on behalf of the family, at least what we might call biblical tikkun or even divine, is Yehuda, who pays in some ways with the life of his two sons. He knows loss deeply based on the behavior of his two sons, which he might not even know actually why God took them. So it actually might explain also why Yehuda is selected to go down to Egypt with Binyamin as a safeguard, because Yaakov knows that he's lost two sons. He knows what it's like to lose a son and someone that you love so deeply. And in some ways, I think this is maybe why Yehuda was selected over Reuven, right? Who said, in some ways, we interpret that Reuven was saying that Yaakov could kill his two sons if he doesn't come back with Binyamin, right? So Rabbi Pliskin, a Mussar teacher, teaches that all midot, all soul character traits in the Mussar practice and path, it must be utilized in appropriate amounts, right? Even ones that we see as negative, like anger. There's a place for balanced, healthy anger and how it gets expressed or utilized. So we're going to keep this in mind as we move through more of this Torah portion. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about this because there's something really deep here. I'm very shocked, and it's very hard in this parsha actually to face how could Yaakov and Yosef be so interdependent, right? Maybe even codependent in some ways, at least the father to the son. And so intertwined their lives, right? That they could not share such an intimate, important knowledge of the trauma that Yosef went through, of being sold into slavery and his life down there. He was 17 when he was taken and sold, right? Yaakov spent 17 years in Egypt being taken care of by Yosef, and somehow this is not brought up or discussed. I think that has to be very heavy. So it's almost like in the blessing too that Reuven ends up taking the blow for all the brothers' behavior, when he's actually ironically the one that spoke out in front of all the brothers not to murder their brother, Yosef. So he's almost like a metaphysical divine tikkun for the patriarchs, right? Who never were held responsible for their sinful and unskillful behavior, right? In their lifetime. So, like, for instance, our patriarch Avraham, may his memory be for blessing, you know, he lied to keep himself alive. He kicked out Hagar and Ishmael. He attempted to sacrifice his son. And then if we look at Yitzhak, who also lied, right, to keep himself alive, that he loved and preferred one son, Esav, over the other, Yaakov, that he was very unbalanced in silence. He had too much silence when he should have spoken. He didn't confront his son Yaakov for the deception and the thievery. He really had too much humility in the sense that it almost came across as like low self-worth, low self-esteem, probably from the trauma of almost being sacrificed by his father and then not speaking to his father ever again. And then coming out of that experience, and his mother was dead when he came down from almost being sacrificed. And then you have Yaakov, who also lives way too much silence in the midah of silence. He has a total fear of confrontation, which would make sense given that he grew up with a father who was way too silent, who has his own trauma that he hadn't dealt with, that he wasn't loved as much as Esav was by his father. And so there's this internalization and fear to confront how painful and difficult it was to his father and maybe even his mother. And so he ends up being, in his youth at 17, impulsive at times. He has too much humility also. A little bit of low self-worth from fear and flight. He moves from fear to fight to flight to fawning. You see all the responses to trauma in Yaakov's behavior. And there really is this sense that Reuven, as a grandson of all this and son to Yaakov, but as a grandson and a great grandson of this kind of intergenerational, transgenerational trauma passed down, where it's starting to become epigenetic, right? Almost in the DNA by now, that Reuven casts off like moral restraint. He's seen as polluting and defiling and profaning the family through his sexual depravity. He is cursed along with Shimon and Levi. And but really that wrath that is laid on him, it's really almost in some ways like just pent up lack of responsibility of Yaakov, lack of responsibility of his father Yitzhak, and a lack of responsibility of his great grandfather Avraham. And this is, as Nechama Lebowitz would love to say to us, this is the train coming in. This is what we call karma, the law that is Hashem, God has built into the nature of the universe, that there is cause and effect. There is consequence to our behavior, and it'll either come in immediately to us, later in our lives, or perhaps in our children and grandchildren's lives. This is what we're going to see unfold even in the book of Shemot, very painfully to say. So let's look at what happens as we move on here, right? Okay. So when Yaakov gets to blessing his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, I should correct it and say Manasseh and Ephraim. Yosef sees that he's doing it the wrong way. He switched his hands, and he actually physically, this is the tikkun he attempts to do, which is so different than first of all, no one does tikkun in this family, but he especially doesn't, no one else grabs the father's hand, the patriarch hand, and tries to correct it and move it. And so Yosef grabs his father's hand, attempts to correct it. And the father says really, really beautifully, if you look at chapter 48, Pasuk 14. So he says, I want to read the exact language for you here so you can see how important it is. Where it's almost like they skipped. Crossing the hands. Hold on, I'm looking at I'm here. And he goes to bless them. Okay, it's actually Pasuk 17 when he goes to do this. So it says here, I'll read it first in English. When Yosef saw that his father was placing his right hand on Ephraim's hand, he thought it wrong, right? This is, look how strong this language is. Okay. Which is someone with a strong moral compass. It's starting to really, this is someone who in his adult life was not residing with his family. He was able to develop a different moral compass because he physically left the family land and the family. This is very important to realize that some people, in order to recover from trauma and grief and loss, will physically have to leave, and that's a good thing sometimes. So he says, right? Okay, Vayaram be'enav, it was evil in his eyes, evil in Yosef's eyes. Okay, he was wrong. So he took his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's hand to Menashe's. And then he says to his father, and then as if like physically he goes to move the hand, then he uses speech. So this is someone who is proactively trying to make sure that, excuse my language, I'll be trying to be very clear here, the BS, the really negative behavior of either deception, or even if something was supposed to be the way it is, the consequences of it, right? Yosef doesn't want that passed on. He doesn't want another family that chooses the younger over the eldest. He wants to stop that train right now. And so he actually then next uses dibor, speech. He says to his father, Lo chen aviv, right? This is not so, father. Nuh-uh, right? For the other is the firstborn, place your right hand on his head. But the father objected. That's really incredible, right? The father rejected. And the language actually used here is Vayema'im aviv. It means he didn't have faith in this. He didn't believe this, right? He objects. And here comes the language I want you to know, right? Yadati vini, yadati. I know, my son, I know. So this line, this pasuk, this wording really affects our parshanim, our commentators. They're like, what? Why does he repeat, I know? Why does he have to repeat, I know, right? There's so much in this statement. And it was only when I was reading this closely and deciding to really meditate and contemplate on it that I realized he might be telling Yosef that he knows that he was sold into slavery, that he knows. Very profound to say, I know, my son, like I know what you're trying to correct here and what you told me. I know all about the generational trauma and everything that was wrong and painful, even if we were supposed to do it that way because that's what God wanted. I know that. And I also know, I know you and I know what happened. That's really profound. I think he's letting Yosef know that not only does he know it is wrong, right? He knows that this is wrong on the limited worldview of only what we humans can see, right? That we can only know from our life experience. He knows this from one who actually deceived his own father and betrayed in order to cause a bigger picture to come true, to fruition, that we say in recovery of trauma and grief and loss, to see the bigger picture, right? To be able to say, like Yosef, actually, you didn't send me, you didn't sell me into slavery. This was God's plan. So the selling into slavery is the limited vision of the human right here. And this is God's plan, the long-term view. I don't like the either or. I said this last time. I think it's and, right? If there's anything the path of the Dharma and mindfulness can teach us, is the word and. So yes, you sold me into slavery, and here's the long-term view. Here's clear seeing that this was God's plan. Okay, so Abraham selecting his son Yitzhak over Ishmael, and actually exiling Ishmael out with Hagar, that is painful trauma. Many words for it, right? In the limited worldview. Okay, the long-term view is God clearly chose Yitzhak to be the next patriarch in line. Same thing, Yitzhak, right? Yitzhak favors Esav, who feeds him the wonderful game, the meat from the wild. And that has consequences for Yaakov. And then Yaakov deceives with his mother and steals the blessing from Esav, and this deception towards his blind father. So the obviously the mother knew, and God knew, the long-term view is that Yaakov also is to be the third patriarch, that long view, right? The seeing things clearly. But the limited view is Yaakov did deception and stole and lied. And and so we don't need to go to the place that some people do, that what's the saying, the bitui, the means justify the ends, or something to that effect. Yes, no, it's the means happened and there is the end, and we have to live with the ends. We have to live with our behavior in the limited worldview and the consequences of it. And we can still have that long-term clear seeing, long-term view that this is how our people, of how the Jews live out our patriarchs and our tribes and our descendants and our tradition, and we live with it, right? We live with this. So yes, finally at the end, when the brothers it's very clear that I wouldn't say the brothers and Yosef had mechila, full, slichut, this forgiveness, this full tikkun, repair, that they took responsibility and he forgave them. Instead, it's more like what happens between Yaakov and Esav when they reunite 20 years later. There's what we call a reconciliation. There's actually even reparations on the part of Yaakov to pay for stealing the blessing. So here with the brothers, this whole kind of recovery and healing story of Yosef, and what was done to him, right? You can see that I want to share with you that what I think is important is that with the clear seeing that there isn't necessarily a brotherliness, it's not like they're living close quarters together and as if they can forget what was done, essentially. And right, Yosef still says to them, I mean, it's so powerful, actually, right? This is why we call him righteous, right? It's Sadiq, is that he says to them, I will sustain you. If you go to Pasuk chapter 50, Pasuk 21, right? when they are fearful that after the father's death that Yosef's going to take revenge and vengeance, kind of like what Esav wanted to do, was planning on to do when the father died, that he was planning on killing Yaakov, that he's saying, have no fear, am I a substitute for God? Although you intended me harm, I'm going to remind you, you intended me harm. God intended it for good, right? Here's this limited view. You intended me harm. God meant it for good, and brought it about for this present result, that the survival of many people. And so he's fear not. And then this is the statement that why he is a Sadiq and what he did. He says that fear not, I will sustain you and your children. I will sustain you and your children. Commentators find this reassurance puzzling because the famine is long gone. And they see this as kind of like a hint that the deterioration of our people and their position in Egyptian society is already beginning to happen. But I think this can be more of like a soul sustaining. Like, yes, this all happened to us. Yes, we have to live together. And guess what? I've been sustaining you this whole time during the famine, and I will continue to, and your children. I'm not going to take out on your children what the vengeance and revengeance is towards you, that or should be on your children. I'm not going to do that. That's what we call righteousness right there, right? This ability to see clearly, this ability to decide that you are going to not only cope, but work on healing and recovery. You're not going to be defined by the brother's act. You're not going to let that define your behavior of what you're going to do to them, right? This is very profound. And I want us to keep that in mind. I don't know about you, but like, to be honest with you, I think the one thing that sustains me most, it's getting very hard here, right? In Haaretz in Israel, we're, past 100 days of our people held as captives, kidnapped in the area of Gaza. And it's really starting to weigh incredibly heavy on the whole nation, including non-Jews who live here. And we are so grateful for all of our allies and people who it's also weighing heavy for them. We're all in this anticipation, right? And it's very important that we resource, that we see our allies and support one another and really be able to do this, to move through this. But what the courage we can take from the Yosef story is that the brothers anticipate, after now 17 years of being in Egypt with him, that he's going to now take this revenge for the terrible crime that they committed against him, right? That they feel the train is coming in finally. This is it. That it had been like delayed, and it doesn't happen. Instead, it's the exact opposite. I'm going to sustain you. And not only that, the father leaves all of them with this beautiful tradition that we still do today. It's this form of resourcing. Like, how are we going to take from our ancestors and God these stories of how we can really use them to survive this present moment? And so when Yaakov does this blessing and switches the hands of Ephraim and Manasseh, right? There's no greater blessing to us today, not even in honor of these two young men, that their names are invoked in the future generations as a paradigm for our glorious destiny, right? We bless our children. Many people bless their sons with Ephraim and Manasseh, right? I bless both my daughter and son with all the names, Ephraim, Manasseh, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. There's something quite, the full meaning of the benediction, right? And this passed on is is this amazing thing done to us, right? This ancient worthiness, this blessing, that it's like our ancestors whispering to us over time with God's strength and help to us. You can get through this. Your ancestors got through some really ugly stuff, right? And we know this also from even recent history, 75, 80 years ago, of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. But even all the way back to our ancestors, this is the gift of the Torah, right? That, even when God, that we learn in the root, right? Where we say, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of them who built up the house of Israel. May your house be like the house of Perez, where Tamar bore to Yehuda. Tamar, who hid as a cultic prostitute, slept with her father-in-law, birthed twins. You can't think of a more like traumatic grief and loss moment of this young woman, basically sent to widowhood the rest of her life. It takes matters into her own hands, resources, right? And then Yehuda admits that he's responsible. And that's where our legacy and destiny comes out of, and that we honor that and we name it. And that should give hizuk, strength, to all of us after all this time, to be able to say, I have some ancestors who have a really unhealthy household, right? Who, like, where there's deception and lying and hiding and having the elephant in the room and not talking about it. And they still stayed together and sustained one another. And that is here what I pass on to you today. In the middle of massive winter flu coming on Israel, they say COVID is coming. We're going through this past the 100 days with our people in captivity, and we're at war from all north, south, east, and west. That you be strengthened and know that we unite and sustain one another. And that's what we're doing. We really are. So may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. That is my blessing for you. We're going to move into our mindfulness meditation practice right now to really begin to internalize this resourcing, this deep equanimity that is so needed in order to make it and cope day to day when we're feeling so shaky and weak. So please assume your posture, whatever is needed for you to come into an upright posture where you really feel, where you really essentially feel that you can internalize the dignity that you're created in the image and likeness of the divine, which you are, we all are, and that you can also feel at ease. So like raise your shoulders up and then let them fall. Take some deep breaths, begin to really move into your posture, whether it's seated like I am, or you want to walk back and forth, going nowhere in particular, or you want to lie down, that's also fine. Or you can also stand in like a strong mountain pose, whatever is needed in this moment. And I'm going to pull up what I'm going to share with you today. If I can just request your patience for a minute. So close your eyes if you have vision and you feel safe and comfortable. And we will begin with 3 deep cleansing breaths. Inhalation, the gift of oxygen from Hashem, and exhalation, out breath. Inhalation, beginning to fully arrive. Invite yourself fully here. Exhalation, coming to stillness, coming to that quiet within. And this last inhalation, inviting the upeka, the equanimity, what we say in Hebrew, menuchat hanefesh, this real calming of the soul. I like to call it centering of the soul, right? Inviting that in. There's something very important here in this midah of equanimity that is so important to our ongoing practice of coping, healing, maybe recovery over time from the genocide of October 7th and the ongoing war. And one of them is this cultivation of menuchat nefesh, of upeka, of equanimity. Really settling into the posture. Cultivating this inner layer, this soul depth of quiet stability, a stillness that is not disturbable. It's that unshakable core. It's where Hashem is. We all have that Nikodat Hashem, right? When we're created in the image and likeness of the divine. It's pure. It can't be touched. We all have that quiet, still place inside of us. And we need to really strengthen and cultivate that depth of that quiet stability, that stillness that cannot be disturbed at all. And this is part of the practice today. So really settling into your posture, allowing you to feel contact points however you are. So if you're seated, feeling your sit bones, the heaviness, if your feet are on the ground, really feeling that contact. And it's really tying into that earth element, right? Or even the Buddha taught us that we make our mind like the elements that don't react to whatever's thrown at them. And that is this unshakable core. That is the God within. So equanimity, this menuchat nefesh, is associated with the earth element. Whether we sit or stand, we value the contact with the ground, with the floor, with the bed, whatever we're lying or sitting on. And really receiving and allowing the sensations of this contact, appreciating them. And this earth element, this equanimity can be experienced in the weight of the body, right? The sense of substance in the limbs. We can notice patterns of tension and uptightness in the limbs. And then we can release the body into gravity, into its natural weight and fullness. Really allowing yourself to arrive. The poet Rike said, patiently trust your own heaviness. And I would add to that, patiently trust your unshakable core, this gift from God. And this can be a moment by moment practice of equanimity, whether we sit, stand, and we breathe. And equanimity, this upeka, this menuchat nefesh, is also embodied in the vertical axis of the body, right? The sense of uprightness. So if we can find this sensed vertical midline running down our body from the top of the head to the front of the throat, touching the front of the spine and descending through the pelvic floor into the earth. Feel that you are held by God, by Hashem, by the ancestors. Really tapping into that unshakable core of our ancestor Yosef when he says, I will sustain you and your children. That quiet stillness, that stability, that rock. Aligning with this vertical axis moment by moment is a practice in equanimity, a practice of balance in the midst of terribly changing conditions. So anytime we are feeling really thrown off by the genocide, by the war, by the loss, by the harm and suffering, by our beautiful people still held, kidnapped, tap into that vertical access, that gift from God, into our unshakable core. Grounding, verticality, all this supports sensitive presence, equanimity. These orientations of being held and tied to the divine can enable a spacious allowing of the ever-changing fields of body sensations and what we experience day in and day out. The ever-changing colors and textures of mood, of thinking, the arising and passing of sense impressions, moment by moment. Breath by breath. Really inviting an attitude of mindful allowing, a mindful breathing with. Even asking yourself, can I be with this? I can be with this, even for a minute. I can resource, I can pivot. Present moment breathing with the winds as they blow, the flickering dance of sensations and feeling tones, letting all experience unfold, always asking, what is the appropriate response here? Letting our orientations of grounding and verticality support our equanimity. Relaxing with, practicing ease in the midst of all things. Practicing a lowering, a tempering of reactivity. Perhaps even getting to a point of no reactivity in the present moment. Sensing all the soft tissue of the body and whether there are any patterns of holding or contraction right now, right here. Asking, can this be softened? Can this be released? Can I expand? Can I tap into that unshakable core, into my moral compass that's been handed down to me from Abraham to Yitzhak, to Yaakov, to Yosef, to all of our ancestors, to Moshe Rabbeinu, Sipporah, his amazing wife. Think about her unshakable core in the upcoming Torah portion, where she will circumcise her own son to save either his life, her life, or Moshe's life, or all of the above. Resourcing, pivoting. Recognizing that all experience is changing. Finding steadiness in the midst of this change. Quietly as a practice throughout your day and even right now. Repeating the word changing. 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 This too shall pass. All this can support an embodied heartful practice of menuchat hanefesh, of upeka, of equanimity, moment by moment. And maybe it's just a simple word or blessing or prayer of allowing, allowing, allowing. Encourage the softening of the textures of the body and the heart. in the field of change. Equanimity includes the recognition that this too will pass, this too shall pass. And we can practice in this way, moment by moment, embodied, present, sensitive, allowing. We will spend the next minute in silence, and I will call you out of the meditation with the bells. Befriending. Responding to whatever arises with kindness, with curiosity, with self-compassion. If you have your eyes closed, gently and slowly open them, joining us back into this sacred Zoom circle or joining us on the YouTube channel, wherever you're checking in today. Today is Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. So grateful for your practice. Make sure you bow to God, Hashem, to taking refuge in community, taking refuge with your teachers, the ancestors, and this practice. We're so grateful to be on this path of Mussar mindfulness together. Do subscribe, join our mailing list, and reach out if you want to begin joining a group to really deepen your daily practice on this lifelong path towards holiness. We thank you for your sponsorships in order to allow me to offer this public offering each week. And as I said, we soon will offer the next Torah portion of Shemot. We go into the book of Exodus. The first Torah portion is Shemot. And then, of course, this coming Shabbat, we'll move into the next Torah portion after Shemot, and we'll cover that Bezrat Hashem Motzei Shabbat, or in the next few days afterwards. So do join us for Shemot, and then do read basically for this coming Shabbat, if you're joining in community or want to read and keep up on the Torah portion, you'll want to read Va'era, the one coming next. And we will continue, Bezrat Hashem, God willing, soon together. And do continue to practice radical self-care and self-compassion in order to be present for what you need to make it day by day with what's going on, and for you to be able to cope so that you can be of service to others, to bring God's good to others. So thank you again for today. Take care.